What is the hardest thing in life to overcome? Stephen Sylvester. When my wife and I had been married for about a month and a half, she started having stomach pains. Strange bruises appeared on her legs, and she felt off most of the time. A trip to urgent care led to a trip to the ER, which led to a trip to see an oncologist at the hospital in the big city near us. She had leukemia. Treatment started immediately, and we had no way of knowing what would happen. I prepared myself for the worst while trying to be strong for her. I could do it most of the time. After 2 weeks in the hospital, she came home, and we started our new life that revolved around managing a disease that she still deals with to this day. Cancer wasn't the hardest thing to overcome. Months later, I walked in on my wife's boss shouting at her about how bad of a job she was doing. He knew she was getting used to being a sick person, and he wasn't clear about his expectations for her, so he took out his frustration on her all at once. She was in tears, and I removed her from the situation as quickly as I could. That night we decided to move. It didn't matter where as long as she didn't have to work for that man anymore. I frantically began job searching, getting a handful of interviews and not feeling right about any of them. Out of the blue I got a call from my old boss who wanted me to come back and work full-time for him in the same town where my family lived. He said, "Bring your wife too, she can work here as well." We cried tears of thanksgiving that we were going to be okay, and then we prepared to move our whole life to a new city and new jobs. Rapid change wasn't the hardest thing to overcome. 3 years and 3 babies later, we found ourselves in dire financial straits. Having children quickly was rewarding but incredibly stressful and busy, and our lives now revolved around them instead of my wife's illness. In a way that was a blessing. It also meant we had very little money left after bills, and some months we had to borrow from friends to buy groceries. Both my parents and my wife's parents had financial woes of their own, so we had to turn to friends often. The most humbling conversation I've ever had was asking friends for financial help, and feeling shameful about being in this position. Every single time our friends were more than willing to help. And every single time we were eventually able to pay them back, by the grace of God. Financial hardship still wasn't the hardest thing to overcome. The hardest thing in life to overcome is despair. It is a crushing weight that can strangle the life out of your will to push through the troubles of life. Despair is the one thing that was always in the background for us through everything we dealt with, and it would have been easy to just give in and believe we would not make it through the trial. But we knew it was a lie, and kept believing that we would be okay. No matter what you're dealing with, no matter how hard your life is, no matter how hopeless everything seems, do not fall into the lie of despair. Anonymous. Related: what was the hardest thing you went through in life, and how did you get past it? Was repeatedly raped by a neighbor when I was 7 years old. I didn't want my mother to find out, because she was a single mother working 3 jobs to support me and my brother, and she cried enough as it was. We lived in a trailer that had holes in the floor so that sometimes raccoons and possums would climb through. I was scared of them. The carpet was infested with fleas. I usually had flea bites all over my body. I never felt clean. We got clothes from Goodwill, but they were usually old, faded, and stained. My mother did the best she could, but we were all alone in the world. We lived in a rural area that was unforgiving of those who deviated from the norm. My mother tried to baptize me when I was a baby, only to be turned away by the local preacher because I was a bastard. We were not welcome in their churches, which were an important part of rural life there. I didn't have friends at school. I was weird, dirty, ugly, too quiet, etc. Even most of the teachers looked at me and my brother in disgust. We were the XXX family. I grew up with the understanding that I was worthless. That I should be ashamed of who I am. I barely said a word through most of my childhood. I didn't say a word to anyone when they pushed me around, taunted me endlessly, beat up my brother and I. I never said a word when my neighbor, who, interestingly, was widely regarded as an outstanding member of society, raped me. I led a very solitary life. My mother was usually gone at work, my brother would devote himself to his own activities, and there I was. I remember I would sit outside of my home and pretend to be a rock, because rocks didn't feel anything and they certainly didn't cry. They were indestructible, I thought. I overheard one of the other little girls discussing the prayer they said before bedtime and I resolved to remember it. It went like this: as I lay down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, if I shall die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I thought about this prayer for the rest of the day, until I went home and decided on my own version: Dear God, I don't want to live anymore. There are other people begging you to keep them alive. Let me take their place. I'll die. I was about 8 years old. But I didn't die, much to my dismay. I woke up the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. The days went by. My situation didn't greatly improve, people weren't much nicer to me, and my life didn't get easier. But I got stronger. I discovered books as a way to escape from my tedious existence, and by the time I was in 5th grade, I was reading at a college level. I grew up and gained control over my life. I was no longer the defenseless, powerless victim I had been as a child. I had power. I could do whatever I wanted. I got a job. I studied hard so I could go to a good college. I escaped from my small, unforgiving town. I have a good job and now in good relationships. People who know me now would never guess I was once that hungry, miserable, terrified, beaten down little girl I had been back then. As for my family, my mother still lives in that trailer. My neighbor is long dead. My older brother still lives with my mother. He has never gotten a driver's license or a job. He doesn't leave the house very often. A part of me understands his reluctance. Why let the world do you more harm when it has already done so much? But I wish he would take the chance. I feel sad that our childhood all but destroyed him. If you want to know how to get through hard things, my answer is probably inadequate, but it is the best I have to offer. My answer is, keep going. Dushka Zapata. Related: what's the hardest thing to give up in life? I have a friend who says her boyfriend has stopped loving her. She tells me every boyfriend she has ever had has stopped loving her. She assures me there is something wrong with her. Her boyfriend is a friend of mine. His mom died a few months ago and he is mourning. What he tells me is that he loves this woman, but that the grief he is managing is too big and is crowding out everything else. Her insecurity and her insistence that he does not love her is proving too much for him to handle. I really want to mind my own business, but I do try to tell my friend that what her boyfriend is going through has nothing to do with her or his love for her. She shakes her head. She does not want to hear me. The hardest thing to give up is the thing we have decided to believe. Renee Weigel. I completely dropped everyone. I deleted all social media and I moved. Got a new car and kept my entire life from there on out private. It's hard when your friends love you but they want to keep living a life of partying and drugs and fun. Especially cause life isn't just a fairy tale, it's real world *******. My friends couldn't understand that I needed to better myself and couldn't do so by partying every night and getting sloshed. They wanted to hang out with me and got really upset when I told them I had to space myself to get my life in order. It was hard and it was sad. I spent every day with these people. And we had many fun adventures like one you'd hear about in movies. I miss my friends all the time too. But right now I'm doing better. I'm healthy and sober and I'm okay.